All right, everybody, and welcome back. It's time to talk about world literature. So, up to this point, I have released 2 full episodes of my world literature podcast on Patreon. So far, I'd say that project is basically still in its infancy. I have a lot more stuff that I need to read before that podcast is really firing on all cylinders, and it has, 15 episodes built up and counting and things like this. I have been releasing little clip videos that show, 5-10 minute segments from those episodes, and I'm going to continue to do that just because I don't have a big audience on Patreon just yet, so I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a taste of it for free. And what I notice about those videos is that, I've yet to develop the skills of a lecturer such that I can, unscripted, which is how I'm trying to do this channel, use storytelling organically and beautifully to elevate and articulate what's so amazing about some of this literature. I have some videos about Nietzsche that are going to be coming out soon, and I like how those ones turned out a little bit better. I think it's partly because I've spent just a little bit more time thinking about that subject matter. Part of the whole appeal here is that the podcast is called World Literature Notes. They're supposed to be just kind of like this bullet point information, kind of to jumpstart your guys' own research and investigation about these topics. I'm trusting that you, as an independent thinker and reader, would take this information and go further with it. You're not using my videos as a independent source of learning without actually turning to the primary text. That's why I keep trying to quote from them and things like this. But anyway, all of that to say, I don't think I have yet communicated adequately what it is about world literature in particular that excites me so much and makes me want to put a lot of time into researching and recording and editing these audios and videos to try and share this information. World literature is, I think, a pretty niche topic, and it's not very widely appreciated or talked about. And on the one hand, that makes a little bit of sense. Literature itself can be a bit of a niche topic, and asking someone to look outside of their own culture's tradition, sometimes that's just not something that occurs to people. If we think about literature at all, it's going to be British literature, American literature, maybe some European literature, except not Goethe or Tasso for whatever reason. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And I don't know, I struggle to think, as a very, very small YouTube creator here, what power do I have to articulate why this is such a travesty to miss out on the beauty and the glory and the majestic, inspiring, and adventurous possibilities of the epic poetry, the love poetry, the spiritual writing, and even novels and philosophy of cultures that aren't, part of the former British Empire. And I don't know, kind of the whole project and part of this channel and that Patreon podcast is going to be to try to articulate that in more detail. But as I was reading recently, like you do, the Vietnamese poem, The Song of Kieu, by some author, I'm probably butchering this, called Nyugen. That's kind of cool how the name of the author rhymes with the name of the book. What occurred to me is that when you read a text which basically you've never heard of before, I've never heard the Song of Kieu spoken about publicly. I think I saw a really, really obscure YouTube video about it. I think actually by a Vietnamese person, which is the only reason I ever heard about this at all. And basically what happens is it's very simple. When you encounter a text that you have never been told about before, that is, as much of the great literature of the world is, as well written and as inspiring and beautiful as any of the great works of European literature, from Dante to Homer to Shakespeare. You can argue who's 3 or 5 steps above in this particular spiritual or intellectual capacity or poetic capacity. But by and large, the great works of India in Sanskrit literature, the 6 great Chinese novels, the plays and the philosophers that you've never heard of in different continents and different languages, on average, they're just as beautiful stories as any of the more popular books you'll find in the classics section that were written in like Victorian England and no other time and place. But the advantage here, from the perspective of a person in the Anglosphere, a text you've never heard of before, is that you get to encounter this without any preconception. You won't have any cultural spoilers, or like if any of us were to go like read the Bible, I'm sure many people haven't read the Bible from start to finish, but we would constantly be encountering stories that we recognize, and it's inevitable that we would bring our preconceptions about those stories and those corresponding beliefs to any reading of the Bible, no matter how diligent and thorough you tried to be, no matter how many translations you consulted. If anybody in the Anglosphere or in Europe reads the Bible, it will be an experience that is tied to 1,000 different opinions that they've heard, 1,000 different, if they've been a part of a particular religious sect or not, or if they are, further stories and movies and all these other things that have been based on Bible stories or the interpretation of the Bible and culture. It's too much a part of our day-to-day mental and cultural world for us to be able to appreciate the Bible as it is, as a text, and read it not without bias. Everybody's going to have bias, but read it as if for the first time, with an opportunity to see with your own eyes and with your own judgment how beautiful those stories must have been for the people first hearing them. There's no suspense for me if I encounter Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet for the first time. I actually just recently read Hamlet for the first time, and I was going into it with so many expectations about what Hamlet was supposed to be, and I knew that it had the structure of a Shakespearean tragedy, so I knew that something, bad was going to happen to Hamlet in the end, even though I had never had it explicitly spoiled for me. So I was not able to appreciate Hamlet as someone going to see it in Renaissance England would have seen it for the first time. But the beautiful advantage of reading stuff from around the world, and also more obscure things from European traditions, is that you do get to experience these for the first time. About a year or two ago, I think it was about a year ago, I got to learn about and read or listen to an abridgment of the Mahabharata for the first time. And this will go down as a really amazing nostalgic memory for me as years go by, because I remember the day that I kind of opened this book, which was a visual illustrated guide to what the Mahabharata even was. And every sentence I read, contained new information that I'd never heard of before. So it was kind of this dopamine of novelty coming at me from all directions. And it was I don't know if you don't know anything about the Mahabharata, every piece of information about it, not to mention the actual stories and the actual articulation of the narrative itself that I then got to experience over the course of the next few months. That completely innocent and untainted encounter with one of the world's greatest stories is impossible for me for any of the classics of Europe or Great Britain or Russia or anything like that. Because if I read Dostoevsky, I've already had 1,000 people tell me 800 things about Dostoevsky, so I'm going to go into it with 900 expectations. And it doesn't have to be a good or a bad thing. Having something spoiled for you doesn't necessarily ruin the story if it's a really, really good work of art, but there's still something to be said for being able to decipher and adjudicate this work of art or this story with your own eyes first, and then hear what other people have to say about it, so that you can more richly engage with that information that secondary information that a culture will tell you about. Now, there is a trade-off with this. Since the Mahabharata, in this case, I'll talk about it again in a second, the Song of the Kieu, the great Chinese novels, Persian poets, whoever else we're going to talk about in these podcast episodes and everything else, because I don't speak Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, Chinese, because I haven't grown up on that continent, there's eventually just going to be like a hard limit to the depth at which I can understand the story. And that is the advantage of reading stuff from your own language and your own culture, is that, okay, once you do get past some of these preconceptions, you do have the chance to basically get almost exactly or very close to where Shakespeare got. If you deeply study his work as a native English speaker or a fluent one, you can really, dive into that. Reading the Bible as a Christian, it's going to come with a certain amount of preconceptions, but it also makes that text come alive in a certain way as an actual part of your life that, that can't be taken for granted either. And that's an experience that you'll never have with a religious text where you don't follow that religion, or and of course, there's a whole thing about the limitations of translation. That's all true. So bearing in mind the humility of, okay, there's a limit to how deeply we can understand these texts, that initial experience of being told a story has something very beautiful about it. And in my view, it's just something that you don't want to miss out on. Personally, I almost feel something, it's not that big a deal, but something kind of approaching anger at the thought that after actually almost 2 decades of grade school and then university education, I almost never ever learned about even the existence of the Sanskrit epics, the great Chinese novels, the Persian poets, even just any substantial information about the Quran, the Vedas, Buddhism, unless it's through this New Age San Francisco lens. And I suppose to exaggerate it a little bit, what a shame and what a waste to live and die an entire human life without ever getting a chance to be told those stories. Anyway, I'm just going to end the video with an actual example from the Song of the Kieu of a passage which really struck me for its beauty, and the experience of reading this poem in this, Penguin Classics translation. I would just describe it as really fun because, I had no idea how this story was going to turn out. I had no idea what was going to happen to Kieu. I just had the opportunity to innocently and imperfectly appreciate it for its cinematic and musical qualities. So that's very corny and everything, but I don't care. Here goes a passage from very early in this story, the Song of the Kieu. Kieu goes home. She draws the flowered blinds. The night gong has sounded. The moon peeps through the window, spilling silver pools across the courtyard, marking out the silhouettes of trees. A red camellia bends towards the east. Dewdrops trickle and fall. Alone in silence, Kieu gazes at the shadowy moon, thinking of what has been and what is yet to come. Each of us must lie in an unkempt grave. Our bright and sparkling life is a fragile bubble, and that fine young man who came across my path, has fate dreamed up some plan for him and me? Seared with these burning thoughts, she writes a new lyric charged with everything she feels. Moonlight slants diagonals through the blinds. She rests her head against the window frame. Suddenly, a girl, wet with rain, dressed with snow, appears in dusky air. Her feet float on lotus blooms. Kieu starts awake. She greets her. Who are you? Have you come from the lost world where peach trees always bloom beside a fairy stream? I am your sister soul, the other says. Have you forgotten? We met today. My lonely bed lies out there to the west, beside a brook that runs beneath a bridge. You pitied me. You carved a poem on that tree whose roots run through my head. I brought your work to my chief, the head of the company of sadness, of all those who are doomed to live and die with a broken heart. He told me your name belongs with ours. We ride in the same boat, but the skipper liked your poem. He gave me 10 new lines and asked if you will weave once more your magic with a brush. Kieu seizes a brush and dashes off 10 poems in a single flow of movement and idea. Dame Tien takes up the paper and exclaims, "How wonderfully these words are worked! We'll put them in the book of songs of sadness. They will take pride of place." Okay, and it goes on, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but these descriptions of like the moonlight coming through the blinds, in the way like the silhouettes, the trees interplay with like the moonlight in the courtyard, and then comes this dream ghost girl standing on lotus blooms, talking about the company of sadness, praising Kieu's poetry. This isn't difficult to understand, like the basics of the story. I'm sure like the deeper esoteric meaning is another question that comes with deeper study or familiar with the original culture and language. But I was also, recently reading Thomas Pynchon, whose work also has often a very cinematic quality to the descriptions of what's happening. But I'm coming to that work with, 1,000 preconceptions of everything I've heard about Thomas Pynchon and all of my understandings. This is, what's it called again? The Gravity's Rainbow, my, beliefs about World War II. All of this is coming with me when I look at that text, and of course that's all going to be worthwhile with enough study and enough care and attention to all the different things going on there. But as an experience of reading, it's just not as fun. It's just not as simple, as enjoyable to just basically turn off my brain, because this was written, 200-300 years ago, if not more, in the oral tradition, on the other side of the planet, before a lot of the historical events that, I consider as contextualizing my life. And so I just have to let all that aside and just purely look at the story itself. Okay, so I've basically made my point. I hope that this, inspires you to check out some, it doesn't even have to be from another country or culture, just some book that you've never heard of or a story that you've never seen before, just to experience it as it is, without any preconceptions, without any recommendations. The only thing I would say about the world literature in particular is that there are, through Penguin Classics, through things like the Clay Sanskrit Library and the Classical Arabic Library, and all these different lists and compilations of all these texts in world literature, there is a chance to encounter some of the great works, when people talk about the classics or the great works of the West or whatever. I'm sure there's some under the radar novelists and even classic books and things that you could do a little research and discover something new, even within like the English tradition and whatever. But there's basically just so much low-hanging fruit. Even if you just like look up what are the top 10 greatest Persian poets, and then take the names that come up and look up English translations, Penguin Classics editions of those books, and right there you already have something to work with. Anyway, I think you get the point. I'd like to thank you for sticking around this long if you did. And yeah, you can check out the links below, whatever Substack, my main channel, and everything else if that's what you're interested in. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.